What's going on, U.S. history kids? First time in a while we've been back doing these videos, but we're back. Um, Always have to keep my mentions and my cloud up, right? Hope you guys are doing well, having a good day. Whenever you watch this video, whether it be immediately after I post it or weeks later when we're taking tests or even later down the way in the future, right? We're starting a new unit here, talking about World War One. You probably remember learning about World War One in your world history class. This class here for U.S. history focuses more on the U.S.'s involvement in the war, how the United States got involved, kind of the attitude here at home, what things were going on here on our home front, um, and kind of examining this war from a U.S. Viewpoint. So kind of just right out the way, World War One happens from 1914 to 1918. Again, not big on dates in my class, but it's good to understand kind of where we are in terms of the timeline in history. So we're rounding, getting close to the 1920s here. Today, we're going to focus our video on the start of World War One, a series of events that happens in 1914. Really sets off the chain reaction that led to the war, but there's also a lot of other factors along with what you're going to learn in your worksheet assignment that also play a role in kind of why World War One became a world war to start. So let's go with the beginnings. So for us in the United States, we were going through a time of a lot of reform and growth, right? We just came out of the progressive era, and this is now entering our new era as the war is going to begin. Our empire had expanded, our economy had grown, and progressivism really changed America for the better. But problems would soon arise from thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean of what was going to go on in Europe. I want to show you this image here of how Europe looks kind of at the time of 1914. For the most part, it looks relatively similar to what Europe looks like today. There's slightly different border boundaries in countries that no longer exist. For example, the Ottoman Empire, down kind of in the bottom right corner, that is known as present-day Turkey. The Russian Empire, still known as Russia, it's not an empire. It also has kind of different border disputes. For the most part, everything to the west of Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom, and Italy is pretty much kind of the same. But everything to the east of Germany, especially in this part of the world of Europe, Eastern Europe, is going to look a lot different. And that's going to kind of be the result of a lot of different wars that go on and take place. And one of those wars, of course, being World War. A couple other things to note, right? North Africa is listed here, but Spain and even France have some kind of territorial control of northern African countries. Italy does as well. All right, let's go ahead and go on. So early on, there's some alliances that are important to know about in Europe before the start of the war, kind of just general relationships that have occurred over time period. And so kind of in the late 1800s, you see kind of two alliances. So you see Germany, Italy, Austria, and Hungary were a part of the Triple Alliance, and they agreed to never attack each other. This came about in 1882. The Triple Entente was a rival agreement, excuse me, that took place the following year as kind of a response kind of alliance between France, Russia, and as well as Great Britain. I don't know why I don't have that listed there. Make sure I do that now before I forget. So this is kind of a rival a rival alliance. And these are arguably the six most powerful countries in Europe at this time. Um, they all are considerably relatively large countries, strong economies, powerful militaries, um, or at least the most powerful in Europe at the time. And so early on, the seeds of rivalry um, and kind of just, you know, going against each other take place uh, early or late in the 1800s. Now, historians generally agree that outside of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which we're going to talk about in a second, there are other underlying factors that played a role into the cause and lead up of World War One. We use a catchy acronym to make it easy for you to remember. It's the main causes. So M.A.I.N. It's an acronym. M standing for militarism, A standing for alliances, I standing for imperialism, N standing for nationalism. Militarism is the belief or desire of a government or people that a country should maintain uh, a strong military capability and be prepared to use it aggressively to defend or promote national interests. The idea of, you know, it's good to have a strong military because then you can kind of do whatever you want, right? It's always good to be ready to fight. So that was one thing. A lot of countries in Europe at the time were started building up their militaries leading into World War One. A lot of that's because of the Industrial Revolution. So we started developing new weapons. You know, the military wanted to have more of these weapons, right? And so kind of everyone, right? If you see your neighbor, someone maybe you're not in alliance with, have 100 tanks, you want to make sure you have 100 tanks. And then all of a sudden they want to have more tanks, and then so on and so forth. It was kind of like an arms race. So that's kind of the militarism effect that happened in Europe at the time. We then have alliances. We kind of just talked about alliances, but already there was kind of some seeds of like distrust and like, you know, why aren't we all just one ally, why one alliance group? Why are there two alliance groups? So there's kind of like two sides. It's kind of like this awkward like beef, this unspoken beef you might have, you know. It's like kind of like, you know, it's like those two friend groups that never get along with each other at high school and are always beefing. Um, so it's kind of like that. We just talked about all that. There's also imperialism. This is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force. In world history, you might remember that a lot of the European countries had territories around the world. And this was by means of kind of improving, you know, imperialism is all about saying you're the best, you have the most territory, but there's also a lot of economic reasons for imperialism, taking advantage of people from around the world, instituting things like slavery to benefit you and your country, taking advantage of, you know, people who are not as well prepared to defend themselves. And that's kind of what imperialism is all about. And so a lot of the European countries competed against each other to try and get the best ports, the best areas of land, to be, you know, have the best relationship with these foreign places around the world. And, you know, it was all competition about, you know, making kind of the most money and taking advantage of the most people. And so again, that kind of stokes little tensions in Europe, right? All this is kind of going into a soup, right? And it's being stirred. It's really kind of building up the tension in Europe at the time. And then we have nationalism. This is the identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Again, this kind of plays in with a lot of the other militarism alliances and imperialism, but it's about being proud to be, say, a German, a French, Russian, right? We have the best military. We have the biggest empire. We have the best navy. We have the best economy. Trying to be super nationalist and proud of your country, so much so that you don't really care about anyone else's country, including your neighbors. You could also look at nationalism in another way, especially when we look at the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. The people who went after Franz Ferdinand and assassinated him, they wanted their own country. They weren't independent. They were controlled and they were under the occupation of Austria and Hungary. And these people wanted an independent nation. They identified their own language and ethnic group that they felt that should be a nation. So nationalism played a big role as well. And these are all the main cause of World War One, which is pretty much what your homework assignment's about. But then, of course, there's Franz Ferdinand. So, like I said, I'm going to shave my beard. I'm going to make the mustache just like that. Saucy. Um, so here's this empire, Austria-Hungary. Okay, pretty big country at the time. Today, it's two countries, Austria and Hungary. At the time, though, they were one empire and they worked kind of together. Even though today they're two separate countries. But they had a lot of control over Eastern European and Southeastern European countries, and groups of people who really didn't identify being Austrian Hungarian. They identified as being different or Slavic people and kind of had their own identities of national identity and whatnot. Um, and that was all kind of throughout this area. So this is Austria and Hungary, but there's other places you might have heard of, like Croatia. They were in the World Cup final. That was a country that wanted independence. Bosnia and Herzegovina, that's a country that was under control of Austria and Hungary, and they wanted their independence. Then there were neighboring countries like Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia that were kind of feeling the pressure from Austria and Hungary to kind of come in and take more land. And so this was really stressful, and people of these kind of groups, these kind of Balkan, they're known as the Balkan countries right here. Um, they wanted kind of their own freedom, and they wanted to push back against Austria and Hungary. So as a result, you get the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This happens in June 28, 1914. Franz Ferdinand was in line to become king of Austria and Hungary, which again was a large and powerful country during this time period in Europe. A few people wanted to make sure this wouldn't happen. Historians refer to this event as the Massive Powder Keg. Pretty much again, Austria and Hungary had kind of taken over a land that really wasn't theirs and controlled it. And the people who were there really didn't identify or like or respect the Austrian-Hungarian government. And for this guy, Franz Ferdinand, to act and go into these cities, in these occupied places, and to kind of parade around in his big old, military, princely suit, and kind of act like, he's the leader, he's their prince. People weren't down with that. And so, I mean, it led to, his death. And his assassination kind of set off a domino effect because of the alliances that other countries agreed to protect each other, right? And you're going to learn more about that too in the homework assignment. But this is the Mr. Tomei guide of kind of what happens. So Franz Ferdinand assassinated, okay? Austria-Hungary upset. Austria-Hungary calls up Germany, and they're like, hey, are you down to like go after these groups of people, particularly in this case, the Serbians, is who Austria-Hungary blamed in this case. And so, Germany is like, yeah, I think we're down, right? And so that, all of a sudden they went after and declared war on Serbia. Italy was kind of flaky. It's like that fake friend that's not really about that action. And so they're like, they dipped, and they didn't really take a side at first. They will take a side later. Austria and Hungary then attacks Serbia, but then Serbia calls on Russia, is like, yo, like, hey, aren't we friends? Aren't we like chill? Aren't we like buddies and all that? So Russia now gets involved. France, they're allies with Russia. So now that France is involved, France is like, all right, I guess we're in this too. Okay. And then Germany pretty much says YOLO. And they're like, well, if this is how it's going to be, they invade Belgium to try and catch them off guard because they think Belgium is going to side with France and Russia. So they invade Belgium out of nowhere. And then Britain, they were angry that Germany invaded Belgium because Belgium and Britain are friends. So then Britain got involved and told Germany to catch this fade. You guys like how I use that cool Gen Z humor? Dab on them. So yeah, I mean, pretty much the whole point of this is to kind of show you how, right, if someone has someone else's back, right, and that line of people who have your back is really long, shows how a lot of countries kind of got involved here in World War I. And so here is kind of how the sides ultimately get taken. So the Allied powers include Great Britain, France, Russia, Serbia, and Belgium. Italy joins a year into the war because they kind of felt like they were the only other real big country that wasn't, doing anything. So they kind of felt like, we got to take a side, otherwise we're going to get dragged into this thing one way or the other. The United States would not come in until the very end. That would be in 1917. And we'll talk a lot more about that because it's U.S. history class. The other side of the group is known as the Central Powers. They make up Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. Now you're probably wondering, why are they called the Central Powers? Well, let's go back to the map of Europe. That's going the wrong way. Actually, this will actually work for me. So if you look here, the Allied countries are going to be in green, right? And the neutral countries are going to be in pink. Central Powers are going to be in orange. The Central Powers are called the Central Powers because they are surrounded on both sides by allies. So they're in the center, right? Thus making them the Central Powers, right? The center of the action, right? The allies are surrounded on both sides. Together, though, they're in the center, and then they're the Central Powers. So that's where they get that name from. Let me go back because I didn't want to go ahead. And so those are going to be the two sides of World War I. And this is how this fight is going to go on for. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the next coming weeks. So make sure you do your homework assignment to help understand a little bit more about what's going on, understanding the reasons, the buildup to World War I. And yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys. So you have a good rest of your day whenever you're watching this. Take care.